Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, hello. What a pleasure to be talking to you, and especially because we've reached the end of a Revolver, and it kind of feels a little bit like this is going to sound a bit wrong, like we've reached the end of Wednesday, and we're now kind of hurtling towards the weekend. If by the weekend, I guess we're talking about Sergeant Pepper.
Yes, that's an analogy I was not expecting you to come up with there, but that's an interesting way of putting
Yeah.
it.
It's also worth pointing out that I am going to refer to Sergeant Pepper. And if at any point over the next few months that we're talking about the album, I hear you refer to Sergeant Pepper's, I'm hanging up the call.
Okay, good to know. I will remember that. Unless, presumably, I'm using the full name of the album title. So if I say Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, that's acceptable.
Yes, that's fine. But in an abbreviated version, it's Sergeant Pepper because there's only one of him. Anyway, carry
Yes.
on.
Good. Well, we're up to a flying start. If we sound a bit sort of odd today, it's because we've spent the last hour trying to fight with our technology to try and be able to record this episode. So, apologies in advance. Today, as we've gathered, we're talking about Revolver, but it has taken us a long time for us to be able to get to the point where we can actually talk about Revolver.
It was also worth pointing out that this album has now defeated two laptops at this end. So mine just completely went up the Swanee last week, and I've managed to completely destroy the laptop of my, good lady her indoors. So we'll see how this goes. There you go.
Well,
Considering this is the album in which technological innovation came to the forefront, that's a little bit coincidental, eh?
that's a lovely link. Thank you so much. That was wonderful and smooth, and I approve it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good. All right. What do you think of Revolver?
Best album of all time. In it, mate. In it. At least it was according to all those lists that came out, especially in about the mid-90s. I think it was definitely there. It's no longer at the top of those lists, in it. But
Well, you say that. I am holding here the 500 greatest albums of all time magazine from Uncut. Want to hazard a guess what number one is?
Let's see. It takes a nation of millions to hold us back.
Yes, that's exactly right. No, of course, it's
Lamar's To
Revolver.
Pimp a Butterfly. Kid A.
Yes, definitely not Kid A. This was published a couple of years ago, so yeah, number one is Revolver. For what it's worth, number two is Velvet Underground and Nico. Number three is Forever Changes Love. Number four is The White Album. And number five is Marquee Moon Television. I don't know what you want to make of that list, but number one, Revolver.
Yeah. Okay. Marquee Moon. Yeah. Okay. Forever Changes. Is that an album you've actually listened to?
It's an album I have now listened to because of this list. It's
Right.
not one that I think I had previously listened to prior to buying this magazine.
And what can you tell me about it?
It's a good album. I realize that is not a revelatory thing to say, but it is a good album. But is it the third best album of all time? I think it probably isn't. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I love Television and Marquee Moon as well. It's also not the fifth best album of all time. But these lists are subjective, aren't they? I mean, that's the whole point of these things. It's meant to spark conversation, I suppose.
The 2023 Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums of all times, it comes in at 180.
Hey,
I needed
lovely.
to do that.
Yes.
And as for a television, he says filtering this list alphabetically, lots of there's 107 for Marquee Moon. Yeah, so I don't know. You can.
What's number one in that list?
It's Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," which was also number one in some of these lists around the turn of the century. And I can remember buying "What's Going On" and listening to it a couple of times, but then after, when I was living in Glasgow, after my flat got broken into and some things got stolen, it was an album that I didn't replace because I'd never really listened to it. I thought, good luck if you're going to buy that and sell that on for a couple of quid. Good on you. But yeah, it wasn't one that I was going to particularly miss. Number two is an album that no doubt comes up reasonably high on the list you've got there as well, which is Pet Sounds, which has at least some relevance to what we're going to talk about today because of the big so-called competition between Mr. Wilson and Lennon and McCartney in terms of inspiration. But Revolver comes in at 11 on this.
Okay, Pet Sounds is 9 in this one.
Okay, and it's the second highest of the Beatles albums after Abbey Road at number 5. Now, as listeners to recent episodes will know, I really do love some parts of Abbey Road. Golden Slumbers is kind of my go-to reference for like a 10 out of 10 song. Ironically, by the time we get to it, probably would have changed my mind on that. But
it's also not a reference; it's your catchphrase.
Well, thank you very much. But it's also got the Sun King on and Octopus's Garden, Maxwell Silver Hammer. So can you honestly say that it is a better, more consistent album than Revolver? Its highs are probably higher than the highs of Revolver. However, I would say there's also very much the tension of a band who are kind of creaking at the edges on it, and there are some real missteps. I think it's sort of better to sort of think of Revolver in relation to Pet Sounds and also then in relation to Sergeant Pepper. And that's the last time I'll say it like that in that weird way, promise. Because I think that's where there's a more useful discussion. But it's such a sign of how pointless and ridiculous these lists are that you're trying to compare, say, Revolver to Purple Rain, to Songs in the Key of Life, to Nevermind, to Exile on Main Street, to London Calling, and Kid A. Why is Kid A the highest Radiohead album on there? I mean,
that's genuinely baffling.
Yeah, but then you've got Tapestry, 25, 26, 27 on this is hilarious. Tapestry, Carole King, Horses, Patti Smith. 27, Enter the Wu-Tang Clan. And then we've got Miles Davis a little further down. How can you possibly in all seriousness go, let's have a conversation about whether Blonde on Blonde is one place better than Talking Heads Remain in Light? Of course it's not. It's Blonde on Blonde. I love Talking Heads. Perhaps Remain in Light isn't my favorite Talking Heads album, but Blonde on Blonde is just better. It's just such a ridiculous thing to do, and yet here we are
doing it.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting, sort of what you say about the fact that for a long time, the best Beatles album sort of changes, because these things are very sort of it's very much like a fashionable kind of thing, because for a long period of time, certainly like when we were teenagers in the 1980s, the best album was Sgt. Pepper. Not just the best Beatles album, just like the best album of all time. It was an undisputed fact, no question about it. If you didn't think that was the case, even although the Beatles were very out of fashion, like it was still that was the default wisdom. That was the fact of the matter. That shifted at some point in the 90s, and for a long time I think it was Abbey Road, and then kind of it became Revolver, and Revolver was kind of like but like if you're really one of the cool kids that knew what they were talking about, you wouldn't go for the more commercial sheen of Abbey Road or the psychedelia of Pepper. It was Revolver. That was you can't describe anything by the Beatles as underground, but it was the underground choice of the time. And especially with that Marvin Gaye album you're talking about before, What's Going On, which is a really good album, but it's not. It's not one that I have a great deep connection with. But there was definitely like a period of time towards the sort of 2000s, I would say, where it then became de rigueur to never have the Beatles at the top of like a greatest albums list. It was always going to be something else, and sometimes it would be something. Okay, so what's going on? It's a very political album. It's by a very important black musician, etc., etc. So it became very trendy for that kind of album to be, usurping the Beatles' position at the top of those kind of lists. That's kind of now fallen back again. And like I said, that magazine, that Uncut magazine that I've got here, that was published I think 2 years ago, and right enough, Revolver's right back at the top again.
Yeah, and there'll be other ones as well. So it was interesting that you mentioned, I think, was it the Velvet Underground and Nico was that in the top five in
Yeah,
Uncut?
it's number two. It's number two.
Yeah, because then that obviously became one that was pretty darn popular as well. And I suppose it also depends upon the publication. I've got the by the way, listener, I have to sort of praise JG because I'm on my iPad here, and it was only when I was frantically scrolling through that I realized that he's got this close-up view of my finger going up and down in front of it. So I'm now, I've got a much more sort of refined and off-camera. So anyway, so I'm currently looking at the NME's list from I think 2013, which has got the Velvet Underground and Nico at number 5, and yep, Revolver is at number 2. Then, interestingly, we have Hunky Dory at number 3.
Oh,
Bowie
really?
would have cropped up from time to time as well. I mean, The Strokes, is this it? Number 4. I mean, come
Oh
on,
dear,
what is
no.
going on? And then very much, very, very, very NME. The Queen is Dead at number
Oh,
1.
that makes sense. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Which is quite an interesting one because I've been listening to Meat is Murder in the car quite a bit recently, and I don't think it's dated very, very well. I will sort of listen to The Queen is Dead again. I think it's another one of those ones where it's quite it's really good to listen to. It's perfect, but actually it's quite one tone, especially in terms of Morrissey's delivery. There's not a lot of variety going on. But then, I'll go back to this and I'll have a little listen, and maybe frankly Mr. Shankly will just kind of pick me up and throw me around, and I'll be 14 again or whatever it is. But yeah, these lists are just pretty ridiculous. And again, NME round out the top 10 with the likes of Different Class, First Stone Roses album, Doolittle, the White Album, and definitely Maybe. So you can sort of see that they are going to be different for their various different audiences. Uncut's more of a rock publication, I think. So it'd be interesting to find out what kind of soul, R&B, hip hop they have in there. And Rolling Stone, I think, is trying to be as eclectic as possible, and therefore is as eclectic as possible. But it's interesting. I wonder, there would have been a lot of people who would have looked at those for some sort of inspiration, but also a lot of people who would look at those lists and go, oh no, oh, that band should be higher than that. Oh no, that's ridiculous. Why is my favorite band not as high up in this as it could be? And this is why we can't have nice things, isn't it? That people try and ascribe some sort of sporting metaphor to art, and whether or not we should even have awards and rankings and ratings for art is another matter. But then the fact that I'm now talking about this as art is quite interesting as well, because there'll be lots of people who won't always see it in that way as well. It's popular culture, and popular culture and art are different things, and they did not expect this to go into this direction as well. Damn you, laptop.
Are they though? I mean, you could. I mean, by it. I mean, I realize this is a very sort of cliched observation to make, but that's you would. I think fair. It would be fair to argue that Shakespeare was is art, but Shakespeare was also popular culture. So I don't think the two are sort of mutually exclusive. I also didn't want to go down this line either, but I have to say I don't agree with the assertion that popular culture cannot be art. It absolutely can be.
The amount of times teaching teenagers that I've pulled like, Shakespeare was the popular culture of his day.
Exactly.
I knew you were going there as soon as that happened. Yeah, but then
I
it's
couldn't let it pass. But I would say Revolver is art. I would say Blonde on
yeah,
Blonde is art. I would say Velvet Underground and Nico is art. They absolutely are. There's absolutely nothing to say that popular culture cannot be art, cannot be artistic. Of course, it can be.
yeah. It's then a case of at what point are we trying to sort of drag it in to mean something more than it actually does? At what point is Revolver actually something more than a really pleasurable 30 minutes of music? And at what point then do we start to consider it something worth preserving for the ages?
Well, I suppose that's going to be entirely down to the content, whether it's social, whether it's political, whether it's technological, whether it's instrumental, whether it's melodic or whatever. If there is something in it of worth, but then how do you judge worth? That's the other question, I suppose, and that's is that just a critical consensus, which brings us back to our lists? Is it something which is purely individual? Well, yes, that's clearly part of it as well, because otherwise everybody would enjoy precisely the same thing for precisely the same reasons, and that is obviously not the case. Like, what is it that ascribes meaning to that kind of debate?
Yeah, and I was watching quite an interesting YouTube. I can't remember who the person was, but it was looking at some aspects of popular culture, and it was going back and looking at the movie Help again. And I started watching it in a little bit of kind of dread, going, "Oh, is this going to be one of those that's going to start to?" Because there's as discussed in the previous episode with about Tomorrow Never Knows, Macca's on the interview warpath, and it's just ramped up again this week,
Oh yeah.
promoting the new album, and watching people on YouTube and Instagram review it, rate it, show off the various vinyl copies that they've got, and oh, I'm a completist. Oh, I've lived with this for a few weeks now, and oh, it's so much more evocative than it once was. Okay, that's absolutely great that you think that, and it's completely down to you. But I'm not hearing the same thing that you are when I admittedly play it on Apple Music, and I think that's worth thinking about. So I was worried that it was going to be another one of those kind of like apologist for everything recent Beatles, everything Apple. Oh, it's another John Lennon re-release. Let's buy it because of the slightly different whatever that's on it, and it comes with a poster and a big glossy book. That means I must pay 100. Anyway, all of that sort of stuff. Actually, it was quite refreshing to have someone basically go, "Yeah, it's a bit shit, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, my kids like it. I don't know why. Look at it, it's a bit rubbish. There's no plot whatsoever." Okay, good. No, so, and because
I
I
mean,
do.
that's what we said about it, isn't it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That did make me a little bit relieved that somebody agreed with me, because there is a tendency, I think, at the minute, especially with all this Beatles content, to be the person on the internet who is the most, "Oh, look at me, Beatles, 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 aren't they brilliant? Fantastic. Let's get ourselves, collaborating with other Beatles, this, that, and the other." We're never going to get invited to do that sort of stuff, so I don't mind saying
I
it.
don't think so.
And let's all sit around and talk about how wonderful the Beatles are. Well, okay, yeah, they are, but there's a lot of content out there at the minute that's just meant, and as wonderful as, say, for example, All Things Must Pass is as an album, it's still the album on which George Harrison rhymes Jesus with visas. So even great people can do some fairly dodgy things at times, and it's okay to say that. But and I think that it's that, again, another one of my catchphrases. For me, Revolver is that emotional response. And a couple of days ago, sitting at work in 30-degree heat, playing it and to getting some work done whilst listening to it, it just reminded me of the folly of your format of doing the songs one by one and talking about them individually, when actually you listen to the album and this is just an absolutely fantastic album from start to finish. But in particular, the run from She Said at the end of side one through to the end of side two and Tomorrow Never Knows is in my mind, currently the best run of any Beatles songs on any Beatles album. Now, they're not the best songs, but it's the best run of songs. I think it's the best, most consistent run of songs put together. There's a little bit of variety in there. There's a bit of difference. There's some similarities as well. There's the more you listen for the atonal stuff, the more you hear it in different places as well. You've got Power, you've got Ringo just being an absolute megastar throughout, and you've just got that run of consistency that certainly we haven't had on any Beatles album up till now. You get so far and then you go, oh, what goes on? Oh, okay, oh, that's nice, isn't it? Right, okay. So whenever you'd hit that run of really good songs before, you'd come crashing into something, and your crash test dummies will go flying through the windscreen, and you'd have to pick up the momentum again. But she said, through to Tomorrow Never Knows, is just packs so many punches. And then, because you can even then start to think about that in terms of, say, Sergeant Pepper. I mean, I would say that She's Leaving Home has much more subtlety to it and is cleverer and a better song than Eleanor Rigby, for example. I think it's just perfection in that sense as well. But then Tomorrow Never Knows isn't as strong as A Day in the Life. And I would challenge anyone who suggests for a moment that it is. I think Tomorrow Never Knows is of its time. Day in the Life is universal, which I think is people kind of forget. But then on the other hand, you've got She Said, Dr. Robert, and Your Bird Can Sing, probably better than a lot of Lennon stuff on Sergeant Pepper. I quite like Good Morning, and 15 for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. They're really brilliant songs. I don't think they're as good as the ones that he's coming up with on that run of songs. And the less that's said at this stage about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, possibly one of the most overrated Beatles songs ever, we'll leave it be at this point. But we're just it's a real powerhouse of an album. And I blooming love it, which I think answers your opening question.
Okay, good. Well, you got there in the end. Thank you for answering that question. I appreciate that. So just a couple of things I want to pick up on there. Firstly, there is no folly to the format for this podcast. I would like to make that extremely clear. And if there is, you agreed to it, so I'm off the hook. Either way, I strongly contest that this podcast is folly. But secondly, that is also kind of the point of doing these episodes, where we have the opportunity to talk about the albums as cohesive wholes rather than as their disparate parts. And one of the interesting things about listening to Revolver, firstly, I agree with you when you say that there hasn't been a run of songs as good on any previous Beatles album. The only one I can really think of maybe is side one of Hard Day's Night, which is really just top to tail. But none of the others have the level of consistency and quality threshold as well. Like you said, there isn't a What Goes On, there isn't a Run for Your Life, there isn't a oh my god, we just need to get this album finished. Everything here earns its place on the album, and it makes such a difference. Again, linking back to sort of what we were saying earlier, there was definitely a period of time when it wasn't a particularly long one, but it was really kind of trendy to say that actually Rubber Soul was the best Beatles album. And, I suspect that probably is just people being contrary for the sake of, or sort of performatively different, let's say, because it clearly isn't. And that's not to say that Rubber Soul isn't a great album. It demonstrably is. But the idea that an album that contains Run for Your Life is somehow better than Revolver, no, it just isn't. And yes, of course, I know these things are subjective, etc., etc. But that's the whole thing about listening to Revolver as a whole. It starts from that opening cough, it finishes with that kind of ragtime piano, and in between, everything is just pretty much wall to wall ideal. It's not the most musically diverse album, I think, in the Beatles' back catalogue. I think there probably is more of a stretch than Sgt. Pepper, no apostrophe S. But I think, given what we've had up until this point, there's no question that it is the most musically diverse album we've had into this point. Certainly, there's not been anything like "Love You Too" in a previous album, because the instrumentation for "Love You Too" is the song. We've had sitar in previous songs like "Norwegian Wood," but it's kind of, I don't want to say it's like decoration or frills around the edges, but it's not like it's an acoustic guitar song that someone has then also put a sitar over the top of. Whereas "Love You Too" is 100% Indian instruments. It is not it is the very core of what that song is. That's a real progression, but it's also something that helps to give real texture and variety to the album. It's something which allows the album to go to new places, and I think that's one of the things that's most impressive about Revolver, is how often it can do that without losing any of the cohesion. Same with Eleanor Rigby. Like, you could argue that Yesterday is a sort of antecedent of it, and I suppose there is an argument for that. But even so, like, Yesterday and Eleanor Rigby aren't really like each other at all, except that it's just Paul on it. That's really the only similarities between them. Same with those beautiful guitars, as she said, which are just perfection. Same with Tomorrow Never Knows, and even kind of like the full kind of Motown stuff with Got to Get You Into Your Life. I Got to Get You Into My Life. It's not really anything like, we've heard McCartney do shrieky vocals before and his Jerry Lee Lewis impression or his Chuck Berry impressions. Like, we know that that's something that he can do, but he's never quite combined it in this way. We've certainly never had a political statement as direct as Taxman. You could argue whether that's a good statement or a bad statement. That's fine, but we've never had anything as upfront and direct, and so on and so on and so on. It's that ability to constantly move to different places whilst maintaining that cohesion. It's just staggering. It's an astonishing achievement.
And I think what's important for listeners to remember is that when we were filling out our back catalogues, the CD was just coming into force. So there was a point where you then start to have that decision. Do I, in the secondhand record shop, do I buy it on tape, or do I get one of the reissues that comes out? And I think Sergeant Pepper was one of the first CDs that I bought alongside, and again, this will date it, Sowing the Seeds of Love, which would have been out at about the same time. And then I think Pet Sounds followed relatively soon after, because it was appearing in a lot of these lists. And I go through waves of enjoying Pet Sounds. I am not a fan of Beach Boys harmonies and the Beach Boys voices in general. They just don't really have any emotional connection for me. But I really do. I like a lot of the sophistication in Pet Sounds, but it's just not as a consistent album as, and it dies a death towards the end. The last instrumental, and then I think Caroline No is a bit kind of, there's an earlier instrumental as well, which isn't that great. And I Just Wasn't Made for These Times only really works when you get to the line, I just wasn't made for these times. It's just really inconsistent otherwise. And I can't remember what song it is, but there's one quite early on where you just randomly get a comedy clown car horn type thing playing. You just think, right, for all the production values that you put into this, and that amazing the amazing layers of sound that you get, and someone's just phoning up, yeah, okay, yeah, you weren't really sure what you were trying to be, and it's got a Sloop John bloody B on it as well. So I really do feel a little bit like you were saying about Rubber Soul. I think people have to try quite hard to overlook some of the less consequential parts of Pet Sound in order to make the case. However, I can imagine that Mr. McCartney listening to that and going, oh, okay, well that's quite interesting. Need to do something about that. Just in the same way as I can imagine Brian Wilson's mind exploding when he listens to Revolver and just goes, dang it, absolutely dang it. I just, now what am I going to do to do that? And then before he can do anything else, Old Pep comes along as well, and then suddenly he's got two masterpieces to try and compete against. Yeah, so but then it is worth remembering that these were big selling albums in the middle of the 60s, and history has been rewritten. It would be interesting if it was rewritten to suggest that these albums were all pervasive, and these sort of megalithic structures that were dominating. But some of the biggest albums of this period in America, for example, were by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. Maybe some of that is down to the cover of Whipped Cream, which, if, dear listener, if you've not seen it, go and have a look. But remember, the King and I and West Side Story and Sound of Music are still selling truckloads of records in both countries. So
I think that is a really, really important point. The week that Revolver got to #1 in the British albums charts, Sound of Music was #2, and it was #1 prior to that. And when Revolver falls down, it's going straight back up to #1 as well. Like the Sound of Music just pretty much outsells everything. It's an astonishingly big seller. So it is worth remembering that, yeah, of course, we know that popular culture in the wider sense is being dominated by the bands that are making the headlines. So you have the controversy of the Rolling Stones, you have this sort of monolithic kind of Beatles stuff, especially, we're past the MBE stuff now, we're into 66, we're in Burning Records and Bigger Than Jesus and all this kind of stuff. So, they are everywhere in terms of popular culture, because that's what sells magazines, that's what sells newspapers, that's what gets people to tune into TV shows. Nobody is buying additional copies of any of that, in order to find out where the Sound of Music soundtrack is. But it is worth remembering that the big ticket items, the big headline items, aren't necessarily the things which are the biggest sellers, or which are I was going to say the most important. How do you judge importance? I don't want to say most important. I'm backing away from that conversation.
Yeah.
Is Revolver more important than the Sound of Music? I don't know. I traditionally can't stand musicals, and so my default answer would be, yeah, of course it is. But as we just said, like, the Sound of Music is massively outselling Revolver at this stage. So, it's somebody's getting something out of it. So I don't want to do the important thing. No. I'm backing away from that.
Yeah, and you can go and visit some of the locations for the Sound of Music as well, and people do. We were in Salzburg, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and there are plenty of tours that will take you around. I kind of got the impression from some of the things people said that people in Salzburg don't necessarily like that film, but they're quite happy to profit off it. So it has that other kind of symbolism to it. And with regards to the Beach Boys and Pet Sounds, sorry, Beach Boys fans, but it's a one-off. It is a one-off. The album before Pet Sounds was Beach Boys Party. And if I could just indulge you for a moment, and some of the songs on that album are covers of, the Everly Brothers, for example, the Crystals. So, we're talking Phil Spector here. And then we have, some covers of some little-known songwriters, Mr. J. Lennon, P. McCartney. They occur on this album. On side 1 of this album, they cover I Should Have Known Better, Tell Me Why, and You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. The fact that this band produced Pet Sounds is something of a miracle, and it's purely down to one person deciding to take, and here's a link, take some time away from touring, let the rest of the band go off and do their touring, and then when they come back, says, written some songs, here they are, this is what they sound like, stick your vocals over the top, which I realize is a gross oversimplification of what happened, but that's the point. And then, the Beatles take some time away from some of the pressures of touring, although they do still go on their final tour after they've recorded this album, and they produce something utterly magnificent. They were able to carry it on, partially because, of course, they had more than one songwriter. That certainly helps. And Brian Wilson just couldn't live up to the pressure of having to do it. But the Beach Boys weren't on a gradual upward curve. They were really struggling in some respects to sort of follow through on some earlier promise, and just hit upon an absolutely amazing formula. The Beatles, you could argue, with the exception of one album, are on an upward curve. And then I suppose the only debate that you could potentially have about it is, do they peak with this? Do they plateau? Or do they keep going? It's then it comes down to, which do you prefer: Revolver, Sergeant Pepper, White Album, Magical Mystery Tour, Abbey Road? So yeah, Pet Sounds.
Wait, it's a small point, but we should remember Magical Mystery Tour isn't an album. Magical Mystery Tour is an EP and a collection of singles. But I don't want to start down that path right now either. Well, let's keep our powder dry on that one.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Just quickly on the subject of the Beach Boys, it's worth pointing out that first week that Revolver went to number 1, Pet Sounds is at number 3, and Summer Days and Summer Nights by the Beach Boys is at number 4. So they have 2 albums next to each other in the charts. Now, one of these albums people will know, and one of these albums people will not know, unless you're like a big Beach Boys fan, and there's a very good reason for that. And at number 12 there's another Beach Boys album, Beach Boys Today. These guys are, like there's a lot of product out there just being churned out. And I agree with you. They're not on an upward curve. They're not developing in the way that the Beatles are. I'm not going to diminish the significance or the quality of Pet Sounds. I do love it as an album. It's not one that would probably crack my top 20 albums of all time, maybe top 50. It isn't. It is a great album, but yeah, there's a lot of slag to get through before you hit the diamond. That's not expression, is it?
No, it's not. No, hang on. What is it? There's a lot of Shawshank before you get to the redemption.
Oh, yeah, there sure it is. There, okay,
let's
go with that.
Summer Days and Summer Nights is one of 3 albums they recorded in 1965 when Quality Control was not at its greatest. However,
3 albums a year. It says, really.
Well, we'll come to that in a second. It does contain "Help Me Rhonda," which is probably the only one that people would know. But when you're talking about 3 albums in a year, you do have to talk about Mr. Robert Zimmerman as well. If I was to pick an album from '66 that I think would rival in any way, shape, or form Revolver, it would be Blonde on Blonde, which I just think is absolutely phenomenal. And there's just so much on it that is just clever and interesting. And he's already in places. I think we talked about this when it was Hey Yeah, You Gotta Hide Your Love Away, because actually Blonde on Blonde has 4 Time Around on it, which is that, was it You Got to Hide Your Love Away? Was that the one that he was parodying? Anyway, there's so much on it, and he's already doing a lot of the things that the Beatles will pick up on. But part of that is also just the length of it, the fact that it's a double album. The whole of side 4 is just 1 track. And there is a lot more variety on there than you would otherwise think, and it comes hot on the tails of things like Highway 61 Revisited as well from 1965, and the absolute quality that he's pumping out is just phenomenal. So it can be done. You can produce lots of albums in a very short space of time and make them absolute high quality, but not that many can. And we are talking about the absolute peak of creative powers of the likes of the Beatles and Bob Dylan to be able to do that. And I have to say as well, Herb Albert's Tijuana Brass, who have 3 #1 albums in 1966 in the American album charts, which is pretty impressive.
Good old Herb Alpert. I have nothing but affection for Herb Alpert, and I
Yeah.
don't think I barely heard his name prior to us starting this podcast. But good for him. Why not? People
Oh,
like it, people enjoy it, and no, I'm exaggerating a little bit for comic effect, but good for him. And again, it brings us back to the conversation we have about what's popular. He is in the charts when Revolver hits number one. He's over here as well. It's not just an American phenomenon for Mr. Albert. So yeah, good for him.
no, I was going to say also a number one album, and this was for 5 weeks in America in March and April of '66. It's Sergeant Barry Sadler and the Ballads of the Green Berets.
Oh God, heaven help us all. Heaven help us all. Good. Yes.
One other thing that I just want to mention about Pet Sounds compared to Revolver is just the product, the package in itself. I find the label for the sleeve for Pet Sounds to be just cringeworthy beyond belief, as though a record executive had said, "Oh well, let's find a picture for this Pet Sounds. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll take pictures of the Beach Boys with some animals." And if you even try to compare that to the artwork, Klaus Bormann's artwork for Revolver, and try and suggest that objectively one is better than the other, you're on a hiding to nothing, because there's so much going on that sleeve for Revolver, and so much sophistication. Not only has the album developed in terms of the quality of the music, but the quality of the product as well has just grown to an extraordinary degree. It's such an important record cover. It's so clever.
It is a really important point, I think. There is something about the cover of Pet Sounds which just looks like it's dashed off. Again, I'm looking at the charts here, and you've got Pet Sounds with the Beach Boys with pets, and then Summer Days and Summer Nights, which is just them on a yacht. And if you didn't know that Pet Sounds was this big kind of totemic album, there's really no difference between the quality of the two album covers. They're just the same, and they're clearly being treated and packaged as the same. Whereas when you look at Revolver, yeah, it's this stark black and white image. It's got the oddity of the eyes. It's got Klaus Verman's artwork. I have a copy of Revolver on vinyl, which is just like the standard normal Revolver release. It's not a remastered super duper quantum hyper blah blah, and it's just that, and it's the back cover with the photo of the four of them with Ringo in the middle of it, black and white picture. It looks incredibly 1966 because of the fashion, but you can tell how every single detail of it has been capital D design, where the track listing is being placed, how they're being spaced, the fonts which are being chosen. Everything about it is detailed and accurate, and it reflects what's going on the album itself. I would nearly said it reflects the interiority of the album, but that would be a dreadful thing for me to say. And so it's a really important point. We and this is another thing that we have seen a gradual improvement of. Like Rubber Soul is clearly being packaged in the same way. And as far back as with the Beatles, we have, real attempts to develop the album cover as, and here we go again, as a piece of art, not just as something which you stick on the cover of it. Now, some of them have been more successful than others, but there is a reason, I think, that the with maybe the exception of Please Please Me, the Beatles covers are pretty much icons in their own right. Now, of course, sure, there's the music, there's the history, there's the blah 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 all around it, but those images are so ingrained as part of popular culture that they become kind of inescapable, and we are now reaching kind of like, I would say, the zenith of that. With this album, the next one, and White, we'll put Magical Mystery to one side for now, although it certainly is striking. We've reached the point where we have. I'm giggling now because you're struggling with your cat there, and it's very funny. I can only apologize to listeners.
I'm just laughing at the fact that she's showing off her butthole to you and carried on.
It's
so impressively. It was
It's the sort of criticism I am used to, believe me. But anyway, I've made my point. Yes, absolutely. The packaging
yeah,
is incredibly important, and it is absolutely a key element to what they're doing now. It really is, in the proper sense, full artistic control.
and actually, I suppose then there's a link to the American bastardization of the album as well, because Dr. Robert and Your Bird Can Sing, and one other song, oh, I'm Only Sleeping, ended up on Yesterday and Today, which came out before Revolver. So I think, effectively Brian Epstein was asked by Capitol Records, say, give us 3 songs. There's been too big a gap. And Yesterday and Today is probably best known for its cover over in the UK anyway, best known for its cover, which is the Butcher cover. Them in the white butcher's coats with various chopped up dolls to represent, bodies, shall we say, of babies. And that, as crass as it might sound, it was an attempt at some form of conceptual art. Missed the mark by many million miles, and misunderstood what would have been acceptable in the marketplace. But they were trying something a little bit different, even if after a while they were sick to death of it. So there is that interesting element going on. And I suppose then the link to Klaus Voormann is, of course, interesting, bearing in mind he was a friend of Stuart Sutcliffe, in particular in Hamburg, and very much involved with the art scene there, as well as also becoming a renowned bass player. So it's kind of interesting. We've got all of these little overlaps going on, and we have something emerging that is much more sophisticated than just 12 songs recorded in a couple of hours. There's quite a few albums still are in this period. So they're pushing territory. They're trying something new, and I think that combined helps to make Revolver such an important album. It is an important album. It has to be an important album. It has stood the test of time in a way that a lot of albums haven't. And you kind of look at the sorry, you're going to get my finger going in front of the camera while I move tabs. You're trying. Oh no, for some reason that's the German league table from the 2022-23 season. That's not the one I was after. Anyway, but if you look at some of the albums that were released and successful in the British charts in that period, they will not be owned by an awful lot of people. They just won't. There won't be that many people who are clinging on to the one of the early Trogs albums, for example. Just aren't.
No, it's sort of interesting what is going on in the charts, the album charts at this point. When we talked about Rubber Soul around 17 years ago, or however long it was,
Yeah.
feels like a long time.
Format.
Thank you. And listen, I'm sticking with this format. That's all there is to it. It was interesting because at that point there was a really big explosion of bands coming through. We really started to see a much more diversity in the chart, a lot more sort of black musicians coming through from America. Some Motown and Stax were coming through, and there were still a lot of soundtrack albums and of course our friend Herbert Alpert, but there was a lot of diversity. At this point in '66, that is much less the case. There are a few interesting bands which are in the sort of top 40s. Small Faces have got an album, Aftermath, by the Rolling Stones. But like you said before, there's a lot of stuff which is just kind of nothing. Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night, Paradise Hawaiian Style by Elvis, Georgie Fame, your boy Ken Dodd, Bert Kaempfert, also with an album called Strangers in the Night. It's all kind of unremarkable. Rubber Soul is still in there. Rubber Soul is at number 21. But there's a lot of stuff which just isn't very interesting. And,
but we're
given that we're in '66, it's sort of interesting to see that.
Yeah, I mean, but we're getting there. We've got, My Generation by The Who at the start of the year. We've got the Walker Brothers releasing umpteen albums. The
Never really
Kinks.
connected with the Walker Brothers, I have to admit.
No, there's something a bit, yeah, Belgian crooner about it,
Yeah.
deliberately so. Spencer Davis Group, Otis Redding, the Animals, the Loving Spoonful, even, yeah, Small Faces. So we're getting there. There is more going on, but yeah, maybe some of the early wave of beat groups is now dying out, and it's being replaced by others. I mean, I think pretty sure you're getting a Cream album in '66. So there are things emerging, and the album charts will be very, very different over the next 2 to 3 years as well. Certainly, as the album becomes more important as well. That's the other thing that we've said in previous years, is that without the Beatles making and selling so many of these albums, would the album itself have been as significant? The likes of Elvis Presley was selling lots and lots of albums, but they were really not much thought was put into it. But now we're getting products. We're getting a physical product that is crafted, that people are taking a lot of time over, and they're trying to raise the quality of. Dylan might be releasing a lot of albums, but they're not slapdash in any way, shape, or form. He's not putting out anything that he doesn't want to appear on that record, which is why the Basement Tapes have so many things on them. And the Beatles are the same. And the Beatles have this amazing capacity to work up a series of songs and to make them presentable. There's no leftover tracks from some of the albums that we're getting to now. It's not as though there is, there are deep cuts and that thing, oh well, we recorded 20 songs and we only decided to put out 14 and we'll save 6 for the retrospective. They're not. What they record, they release. And if everything they release and record is of this quality, that is just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. The only time in their life when you could question whether or not they should have released everything is the White Album. But there's arguments for and against that, I guess.
Yes, well, arguments that we will be having in the, I was going to say not too distant future, actually in the relatively distant future, but we will get there at the end.
Yeah, we've got at least a year to go before we get to that.
Yeah, we've got a while, and we're going to be discussing it for a very long time. But regardless, no, I mean, it kind of brings us back to what you were saying about artwork as well. It really is developing the album as a significant piece of work, not just something which gets tossed out. And that development will go on, I think, to be one of the most crucial legacies of this period of the band. I think you can certainly argue that it doesn't start with Revolver. I think I would probably say it starts, I want to say Rubber Soul, so I'm going to. I think it probably starts with Rubber Soul. No, again, not that there haven't been important artistic developments up to that point, but that's the point where it's okay. Now it's everything. Now it's the whole thing. Through Pepper and its kind of maximalist approach, and then the White Album's direct contrast to that, and then the lazy yet iconic Abbey Road. There's going to be a lot more of this sort of to discuss coming forward, but because all of these albums shift so many units, not necessarily the biggest selling albums of the year, but still so many units, it's only logical that other bands are going to want to get in on the same approaches. And I think particularly from a sort of British music perspective, you really see that starting to come through with bands like the Stones and with bands like the Kinks and the Who. And the Stones will be, their success with that will be variable, because on the one hand, you might have something as amazing as Let It Bleed, and you might have something as terrible as Satanic Majesty's Request. But, they're still following the same path. They're still trying to make a complete, cohesive whole unit. And do you think it would be too much to say that it's the start of process that sort of leads to like the super maximalism of sort of prog and all that kind of stuff?
I think it's a little bit too much. I don't know, is this an opportunity for you to talk about psychedelia? Because there are
No, I'm not going to do
there,
that.
there are there are psychedelic albums that are going on at the moment. I mean, you've got a um, embryonic Pink Floyd around this time, for example, and they were recording their first album, and the Beatles were recording Sergeant Pepper. So there's some overlap in terms of that as an art form, and then obviously psychedelia did move in towards prog, at least in my view. And some people no doubt looked at Blonde on Blonde and thought, oh my God, 2 records in one? Come on, Bob, that's a bit too much. There's a song that's 12 minutes, Bob. There's another one that's 7 minutes. What are you doing? So I think there is some excess around. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't really have that strong an opinion.
Okay, good. That's what we're known for, not really having strong opinions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Apart from about Revolver, which is bloody brilliant.
Yes, it is. Is there anything else you would say about Revolver?
Oh, I don't know. Probably. I mean, I could talk about it for a long time, but yeah. When I bought it, it was on one of those kind of reissues from the 70s of the cassettes that had the brown strip at the top and the bottom on the inlay, and so actually the album cover itself was relatively small. And it's only, I suppose, recently that I started to properly look at that cover and realize just how interesting and sophisticated it is. And it's probably helped by listening to it on the Beatles YouTube channel as well, where they then start animating various bits of the album cover on, I think, Taxman, a couple of the other songs as well. And it just makes you realize how sophisticated and clever it is. So I think that's something that's worth noting. We should also make a note of the fact that we have, this is Pig George in some ways, where he gets such a big percentage of the album and delivers, absolutely delivers, and delivers with a variety of songs as well. And that's fantastic. Obviously, he's much less involved in the next album. So it's interesting that he sort of rises here, and then he doesn't slack off, but perhaps McCartney becomes much more dominant on the next one, to the exclusion of him. So I think that's worth noting as well. But I think it's also just worth emphasising. I said it before that I genuinely think the star of the album is Ringo. I think the drumming on this is so powerful, has such variety, and is so memorable. And if you've listened to our Tomorrow Never Knows one, you'll know that a lot of the covers that we listen to, the key thing that they take from it is Ringo's drum beat. They can't cover it without using Ringo's drum beat, and that, I think, is the symbol of someone who is so, we say, quietly effective. He's not that quiet on some of the songs. He's so quietly effective as to have left an imprint that is just amazing.
Yeah, well, you're not going to get any argument from me. I think it's his best album. I think he is the star player here. He's just simply incredible. There's not a second where I think he puts a foot wrong, where he misjudges something. It is incredibly distinctive, incredibly well recorded as well. I think that's
Yeah.
also something else that's worth just mentioning in passing. Like the recording of Ringo's drums is something which has really improved over the course of the albums that we've covered, and it's now got to the point where they can be captured much more effectively. We're still only on 4-track recording technology, so there are limits to what can be done, and that does mean that you sometimes get weird shifts in left and right channels and stuff like that. But overall, the ability to record Ringo's drums in the way that he sounds has never been better than it is here. There's nothing here, I think, that isn't that he does that he has edit. there's nothing he does on Revolver that isn't better than everything else he's done up to this point. And he's been fantastic up to this point. Like, I love Ringo, and I'm a massive fan of him as a drummer. But he just surpasses himself here. It's yeah, we're going to say it's a career best. It probably is, right?
Yeah, yeah, and also they give him a decent song to sing as well, which makes a difference.
Yeah, and one that really feels like it's properly tailored to something he can do. It's not the kind of song that he's been given before, and it's genuinely inventive and creative. It's not a toss-off in the way that a lot of his numbers have been in the past. All right, well, here's your spot. You just get it done, and then we'll quietly move on with the rest of the album. Here, it's a really important part of the album, and again, it goes back to that ability to just shift into different modes in the way that the album does. They've never done what is both a kid's song and also very much not a kid's song as well. It's an amazing thing. It suits him absolutely down to the ground, and everybody's raising their game for it. It's astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more that you could. I mean, there's loads of content around that around this album, and there's so much you could say. And Friday night on Sky, there was a documentary. I think they've shown it a few times now. I don't know. It's kind of the band who changed everything or something like that. I don't know. And it's got interviews with the likes of Barry Miles, and I happened to switch over at the point where they were talking about Tomorrow Never Knows, and they were talking about it with such pretension and just how significant X, Y, and Z, and the song that changed everything, and of course there's so much of that content around. This is the album that changed everything. No, it didn't. People still bought West Side Story and The Sound of Music afterwards, and Mantovani, and so on and so forth. But for people like us, I can't imagine how music would have sounded without Revolver, because Sergeant Pepper wouldn't have sounded as it did without being preceded by Revolver as well. So I think in the grand scheme of things, all you can do is talk about how significant it is to you, and it's certainly one of the most significant albums that I can listen to, and I just need to remember to listen to it as an album more often, because that run of songs is just absolutely killer.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to get any argument from me.
Okay, what's the format to end this then?
The format to end this is we give it a score.
Oh, right. Let's go for the first double figures of my tenure as contributor to this podcast.
So you're giving it 10?
Well, have I given a 10 to anything? Dane, did I give Day in the Life a 10? Not Day in the Life. We
haven't got to yet.
In my life.
Oh, hang on. Let me check the spreadsheet. That's a good question. In my life, you did give a straight 10 to, yes.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So we've got Revolver, we've got In My Life, and potentially Golden Slumbers. Okay,
lovely. Good. I am going to go for... it's either going to be 9 or 9.5. I need some headroom because it's not my favorite Beatles album, even although it's absolutely bloody amazing. So I think I'll go 9.
So out of interest, how many months have I got to wait to find out what your favorite Beatles album is?
Well, I've already told you, so if you've been paying attention, you'd know the answer to that question. Although not in this episode, to be fair.
Okay, I clearly was paying attention at the time, but have forgotten it. So
that's fair enough. A while. You've got a while to wait.
Okay, all right. So I'm now going to go back and try and remember how you reacted when I started slagging off the Sun King.
Okay, well, whilst you do that, we have to briefly dip into our post bag and have a quick email. We were going to do this at the start of the show and then didn't, despite the fact we both said, we'll do it at the start of the show.
My fault. I just Yeah.
No fault, just a statement of fact. But anyway, we have a lovely email which comes to us from Luxembourg, of all places. It's nice to know that we have a listener in Luxembourg. Anyway, it says, "Dear Andrew and Gigi, first of all, thank you for your great podcast. You're both knowledgeable. How dare you? And funny, and I enjoy the irreverent way you talk about the songs. I finally decided to get a hold of you when you asked for covers of these two deep cuts, as the youngsters say. So we are talking about She Said, and Your Bird Can Sing here. Judging by your reference to musical likes and dislikes, I suspect you are not as into metal at all. So you probably are not familiar with Yellow Matter Custard. This changes now. And we have a couple of YouTube links to a couple of shows, one covering Indeed She Said, and one covering And Your Bird Can Sing. Email carries on. Not only is the set list amazing, but the musicians clearly love the Beatles and are having fun. At one point, they start quizzing the audience about the name of all four Ruttles. I don't really go far wrong if you're doing that. I saw the Analogues a few years ago, and I'm planning to see the Young Analogues at the end of May. However, Yellow Matter Custard is my favourite tribute band because I love Neil Morris and Mike Portnoy so much more than the other incarnations. But for many years, did not know they were such fans of the Beatles. From your only listener in Luxembourg, but originally from Bulgaria. Keep listening. Well, thank you very much. I've listened to both of them, and they are really good. I really thoroughly enjoyed them. So thank you for sending these in. I'll put the two YouTube links in the comments for the episode when it posts, so that other people can have a wee listen to them as well. But it was really nice. I've only ever seen one tribute band for the Beatles, which was the Bootleg Beatles, and they were really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but it is quite nice to see people performing just as musicians rather than trying to get dressed up and do the whole, thing. And I was deeply and bitterly envious of the Rickenbacker, which is on stage as well, because I still deeply crave one of those. But other than that, yeah, it was really fascinating to see. So thank you very much.
I'd be interested to go and have a listen. Not into heavy metal, but yeah, willing to give it a go.
Good. They're not heavy metal covers, to be clear. They're just heavy. They're just from a heavy metal band who are then going on to do Beatles covers. So, yeah. But it is really interesting to listen to. Highly recommended.
I mean, I would. It would be quite interesting to hear a genre take on it, and I think, there was a point when one of my favourite covers band of all time was Hayseed Dixie, who did AC/DC covers in bluegrass style. And it was, they were playing the festival scene over here for a while, so they're probably still going. And yeah, and of course one of the best Paul McCartney cover acts out at the moment is Paul McCartney, although he's doing a slightly late Johnny Cash sounding version of himself now. But yeah,
and all the better for it.
Well, okay. If you listen to it anyway, never mind. Yeah, interested to hear about the young analogues, and if I've got it right, they're doing the 62 to 65 range, which of course was something that the analogues didn't touch themselves when they were performing. So I think young as in younger than the analogues, but also young as in doing the earlier Beatles records as well. So that will be interesting, and as I will have a little look at their upcoming tour as we are going through. Well, I'm going to be in Western Germany in July and August, so if there's an excuse to nip over the border into the Netherlands to see them, then I might try and take that.
Lovely. Well, it's never a bad thing to go to the Netherlands. That's what I'd say. But then I am very biased on that subject. Right. I think that'll probably do us for today. You can really get a hold of us. You can email us. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. And we're BeatlesStuffology on Instagram. You can also find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. And we would very much like it if you could like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you're using, so that more people can find the show. Next episode, well, it's one of the biggies. It's Strawberry Fields Forever. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.